My husband, Mark, was making dinner when he got a text from a coworker. It read, "Boss, I miss you." After a moment's hesitation, I responded in his place, "Come over. My wife isn't home tonight." A short while later, the doorbell rang. My husband's face turned white as a sheet, completely drained of color. In the spacious kitchen of our luxury apartment on the Upper East Side, the sweet and savory aroma of braised short ribs filled the air. It was the scent of a warm hearth, of the happy family life that so many dream of, or at least, that's what I had firmly believed until that very moment. Mark stood at the stove, stirring the pot that simmered over a low flame. He wore the navy blue apron I'd given him for our wedding anniversary while humming an old love song. Seen from behind, Mark was the picture of a successful man, a consummate professional who also knew how to care for his family. He always told me that a man earning a living was an obligation, but cooking at home for his wife was a privilege. I was sitting at the kitchen island, flipping through an architecture magazine, but my mind was elsewhere. The warm yellow light illuminated the marble countertop, where Mark's latest model iPhone lay silent. Its black screen was like an unfathomable abyss, hiding secrets that not even I, his wife, the person closest to him, had ever suspected. Mark turned around with a radiant smile on his handsome face. The fine lines beginning to form around his eyes only added to his charm. He asked me to taste the stew to see if the salt was right, then turned back to focus on the complex seasonings. It was right at that moment. The phone screen on the counter suddenly lit up, without a sound, but with a cold blue glow that signaled the arrival of a text message. My gaze was instinctively drawn to it. The sentence that appeared on the lock screen was short, but it was enough to shatter the peaceful world I had worked so hard to build. Sender, Ashley, intern. The message, "Boss, I miss you." Just 4 words. I miss you. My heart no longer ached. That pain had died a week earlier, when I held the bank statement in my hands. All that was left now was a profound contempt and a meticulously laid plan. Ashley. I knew that name. She was the new intern who had joined Mark's department a few months ago. I remembered Mark mentioning her once, praising her for being quick, polite, and eager to learn. What I hadn't imagined was that her eagerness to learn would extend to her boss's husband. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The rationality of a woman in her 30s, who had overcome countless difficulties to get where she was, wouldn't allow me to scream or break things. If I made a scene, Mark would invent some excuse, claiming it was a joke from an immature girl. I needed something more. I needed irrefutable proof, evidence they couldn't deny. Mark continued chopping vegetables. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board drowned out the wild beating of my heart. Silently, I picked up the phone. The passcode to unlock it was our wedding anniversary. How ironic. He used the most important day of our lives as a shield for his dirty secrets. I typed in the 6 familiar digits. The screen unlocked, showing the text conversation with the unread message at the top. Without reading it, I quickly typed a reply. My fingers, cold and precise, slid across the virtual keyboard. Come over. My wife isn't home tonight. I hit send. I saw the double blue check indicating it was read, and a faint smile formed on my lips. I took a screenshot of that brief exchange, sent it to my own phone, and deleted every trace of it from Mark's phone. I wanted him to be completely oblivious when the show began. I placed the smartphone back where it had been, at the exact same angle. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the repressed rage boiling deep within me. I looked at Mark's back. He was still the same man, with the same devoted appearance. But now, in my eyes, it was all disgusting hypocrisy. He was playing the part of the perfect husband, but his mind was probably flying to his young, pretty lover. If he wanted to act in this farce so badly, I would make sure I directed the tragic final scene myself. I fixed my hair, composed my expression, and tried to return to my usual state of calm. The storm inside me was hidden behind a serene gaze, waiting for the chance to unleash its devastation. This was going to be a very long night. Mark served the steaming short ribs on a large platter and placed it in the center of the dining table. The rich aroma of red wine, herbs, and beef spread through the dining room. With a cloth, he meticulously wiped away even the slightest splatter from the rim of the dish. Yesterday, that delicate touch would have moved me to hug him. Today, however, looking at that stew was like gazing at sugar-coated poison. He served me a plate of creamy polenta and, taking the most appetizing piece of meat, placed it on top. In a warm, deep voice, he said, "Eat it while it's hot. I cooked the meat until it melts in your mouth." He even bragged about going to 3 different markets to find the best cut just to take care of me as I deserved. I accepted the plate from my husband, making a superhuman effort to keep my hands from shaking. I brought a piece of meat to my mouth and chewed it slowly. It was incredibly tender, and the sauce was just how I liked it. But as I swallowed, I tasted something bitter and nauseating, as if I were chewing ash. I had to take a large gulp of water to suppress the urge to gag. I looked at the man sitting across from me. Mark ate with a healthy appetite, occasionally offering me a side dish and telling me amusing anecdotes from work. He talked about a new project, how the CEO had congratulated him, and his plans for a promotion that year. But there was not a single mention of the name Ashley or of that young intern. I wondered how a person could lead a double life with such mastery, able to receive an "I miss you" from his lover, and moments later play the role of the exemplary husband who adores his wife. Perhaps during our 6 years of marriage, he had repeated this performance so many times that even I could no longer distinguish what was real and what was fake. I remembered our difficult beginnings when we first got married. We started with nothing in a tiny studio apartment in Queens. Mark held my hand and swore he would work tirelessly so that I would never want for anything to get us a decent home, and he kept his promise. This luxury apartment, all these comforts, were a testament to our joint effort, but it seems that as material abundance grew, people's hearts also began to change. Satiety gave way to base desires, and the devoted wife who once shared a simple sandwich with him now seemed bland compared to the young, fresh women outside. Pretending to be full, I put down my silverware. I said I was a little tired and didn't have much of an appetite. Mark immediately put on a worried expression. He got up, came over to me, and placed his hand on my forehead to check for a fever. His hand was warm, but as soon as it touched my skin, I felt a chill that went straight to my bones. I turned my head slightly to dodge his hypocritical touch, excusing myself to get a glass of water. I glanced at the clock on the wall. The short hand was approaching 7, the long hand nearing 12. Time passed with a mocking slowness. From her office or her student apartment, it would take her between 30 and 45 minutes to get here. I was not going to let this golden opportunity slip by. My wife isn't home tonight. That spell was more powerful than any invitation. When I returned to the table, Mark was clearing the dishes. He told me to go rest in the living room, that he would handle the washing up. The image of my husband rolling up his sleeves to do the dishes, something I used to boast about to my friends, now seemed like just another scene in his disgusting theater. I sat on the sofa and picked up the TV remote but didn't turn it on. My eyes were fixed on the front door, and my ears were alert to any sound from the hallway. A fierce battle raged in my mind. A part of me wished she wouldn't come, that it had all been a bad joke so I could continue deceiving myself. But the other half, the colder, crueler part, longed for the doorbell to ring as soon as possible. I wanted this pain to come out into the open in all its rawness, because an abscess only heals when it bursts, even if the scar it leaves is forever. Each minute passed with infinite heaviness. The sound of running water from the kitchen stopped. Mark came out, drying his hands with a towel, and asked if I wanted some fruit for dessert. I shook my head and managed a faint smile. It was probably a twisted, forced smile, but Mark didn't notice. He was too confident in his own perfection, or perhaps he had never cared enough about my state of mind to notice anything strange in my eyes. The clock struck exactly 8 o'clock. The apartment was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the second hand. Mark sat on the opposite sofa and started reading the news on his phone with a look of complete tranquility. He probably thought it would be another peaceful evening with his wife, or maybe he was already planning what message he would send his lover as soon as I fell asleep. He had no idea that the storm was about to break right on his doorstep. Ding dong. The sound of the doorbell shattered the silence. It wasn't loud, but in that space, it echoed like the starting gun of a war. Mark looked up, startled. In his eyes, there was surprise mixed with a hint of bewilderment. He looked at the clock, then at the door, and muttered, "Who could that be at this hour?" Then he looked at me as if I had the answer. I remained motionless on the sofa, maintaining an almost icy composure. I said, "You stay put. I'll get it." My voice was soft but firm, leaving him no room to move. I stood up and walked slowly toward the door. Each step on the hardwood floor sounded heavy, like the hammer blows driving the final nails into a coffin. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the strange excitement of a hunter about to trap her prey. I took a deep breath, composed myself, and put my hand on the doorknob. I turned the lock and opened the heavy wooden door. In front of me stood a young, petite woman, well made up, but with a face that still had a girlish air. She wore a tight dress that highlighted her young figure, and in her hands she held a small box with a carefully packaged individual cake. The moment she saw me, the flirtatious smile on her lips vanished, replaced by an expression of pure panic. Her eyes widened like saucers, her pupils constricted in fear, and her face, previously flushed, turned pale as paper. She froze, her trembling hands nearly dropping the cake box. She had expected Mark to open the door. She had surely imagined the scene, jumping into his arms, telling him in a syrupy voice how much she had missed him. But the harsh reality that hit her head-on was the image of me, the lady of the house, his lawful wife, blocking the entrance with a gaze as sharp as a knife. I didn't say anything at first, simply observing her terrified expression in silence. My silence made the atmosphere even more suffocating. Ashley took half a step back, her lips moving as if she wanted to say something, but her throat seemed blocked, as if someone were strangling her. She glanced inside the apartment and then back at me, with the expression of a thief caught red-handed. I heard Mark's footsteps behind me. "Who is it, honey? What's taking so long?" he asked. His voice threw Ashley into even greater confusion. She looked around as if searching for an escape route, but I wasn't going to let my prey get away so easily. I smiled. It was probably a smile more terrifying than a cry. And then I spoke. My voice was loud and clear enough for both the person inside and the one outside to hear, loaded with a cold authority. "Hello, Ashley. Are you here for my husband?" My question was like a bucket of cold water on Ashley, and at the same time, a shock to the approaching Mark. I saw Ashley flinch. She realized she had fallen into a trap, but there was no turning back. The door was open. The show had officially begun. Ashley cowered like a small bird that had mistakenly fallen into an eagle's nest. She clutched the cake box so tightly her knuckles turned white. Stammering, she barely managed to articulate a few words to justify her untimely appearance. She said she had heard Mark was sick, and since she was passing by, she had decided to bring him a cake, hoping he would recover soon so he could continue teaching her, the intern. A lie so clumsy it was pathetic. I knew perfectly well that Mark wasn't sick and that our building was so out of the way it was impossible to be just passing by unless you came on purpose. But I didn't correct her. The grace of the cat-and-mouse game is not to kill the mouse immediately, but to play with it until it's exhausted from sheer terror. Maintaining a faint smile, I fixed my gaze on her face, which was changing color by the second. Seeing Ashley try to turn and flee, I said in a voice as cold as ice, "If you take a single step out of this hallway, tomorrow the entire company and your parents back home will receive the photos and messages between you two. Come in and let's talk calmly, and I'll let you keep a shred of dignity." Ashley froze in place. Trembling, she reluctantly followed me inside. I told her that, since she was here, she could take the opportunity to see the apartment, that the atmosphere was very cozy. I made a point of saying I wanted to formally introduce her to my husband. I deliberately drew out the word husband, as if I were stamping a seal of ownership on the man who was frozen behind me. Mark had already reached the living room. Seeing me walk in with Ashley, his face fell even more than hers. His eyes were wide and his mouth was open, but he couldn't say a word. The phone he was holding fell onto the sofa. He looked back and forth between Ashley and me, swinging violently between panic and confusion. He couldn't understand why Ashley was there or why I was receiving her so calmly. I led Ashley to the center of the living room and sat her down in the armchair opposite the large sofa where Mark usually sat. Ashley perched on the edge, her back straight and her knees together, not daring to look up. I turned to Mark and gestured for him to sit next to me. Like a soulless automaton, Mark staggered to the sofa. Despite the air conditioning being set to 72 degrees, beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He sat as far away from me as possible, as if I were a bomb about to explode. I began the introductions. Pointing to Ashley, I told Mark that this was that good intern he talked so much about, who had come to visit him in the middle of the night with a cake, and everything upon hearing her boss was sick. Then I introduced Mark to Ashley, saying he was the most exemplary husband in the world, a man who had never disappointed me. Each of my compliments was like a needle piercing Mark's skin. I saw him shrink. I noticed Ashley cast a pleading look at Mark. She must have been hoping for a word, an excuse, a reassuring gesture to save her from this situation, but all she received was a cowardly evasion. Mark kept his head down, fiddling with the hem of his shirt, not daring to utter a word. His cowardice only increased my contempt, and probably even Ashley began to feel a pang of disappointment. The man who seemed so admirable and authoritative at the office had become, upon being caught in his infidelity, a pathetic little man who feared his wife more than a lion. I stood up, saying I was going to get our guests something to drink. I asked Ashley what she would like, orange juice, water, or a hot tea. In a barely audible voice, she replied that water would be fine. I smiled and went to the kitchen. The living room fell into a deathly silence. I knew that as soon as I was out of sight, those two would exchange panicked glances, but they wouldn't dare speak for fear I would overhear. And that was exactly what I wanted, to let the terror slowly eat away at their minds. In the kitchen, I deliberately made noise, taking out glasses and plates so they would know I was still nearby, listening. I opened the glass cabinet and walked past the expensive crystalware we used for important guests. My hand stopped on a stack of thin, disposable plastic cups, the kind used for outdoor parties or at street fairs. I took one of those cups and filled it with water from the dispenser. The choice was not accidental. I wanted to belittle Ashley through the smallest detail. I wanted her to understand that her place in this house, in our life, was as cheap and temporary as that cup. An object to be used and thrown away, not worth keeping. I returned to the living room with a tray and placed the plastic cup of water in front of Ashley. For Mark and myself, however, I served tea in elegant fine china cups with a gold rim. The stark contrast between the two types of vessels was obvious on the glass coffee table. Ashley looked at the plastic cup, so out of place on the luxurious table, and her face turned a deep shade of red with humiliation. She had understood the message. It was a wordless insult, but deeper and sharper than any curse. I sat down next to Mark, this time deliberately pressing against him. I took his arm and rested my head on his shoulder in an affectionate gesture. Mark stiffened like a wooden doll, his muscles tense. Through his thin shirt, I could feel the frantic beating of his heart. Cold sweat continued to slide down his temples. I started the conversation with hypocritically social questions. I asked Ashley how her internship was going, if Mark was very demanding with her, if he didn't harass the interns. As I spoke, I stroked Mark's arm and gave him loving glances from time to time. Ashley responded in monosyllables, not daring to look directly at the tender scene unfolding before her. In her eyes, envy, bitterness, and fear mingled. She was witnessing how the man she coveted belonged legally and completely to another woman. The sweet promises Mark might have whispered to her when they were alone became insignificant in the face of this crushing reality. The air in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. Not even the gentle hum of the air conditioner could dispel the suffocating atmosphere. I felt as if I were watching a tragic silent play, where each actor struggled to perform their role, with the difference that only I had the script and knew the ending. Suddenly, I changed the subject and turned to Mark with an excited voice. I brought up our vacation plans to Hawaii for the following month. I enthusiastically described an idyllic future: the blue sea, the white sand, romantic, candle-lit dinners. I added that we were looking at a farmhouse in the Hudson Valley to spend weekends cultivating our own garden and fishing, and that we were already planning how to care for our parents in their old age. Each of my words was a dagger in Ashley's heart. She would realize she was completely excluded from Mark's life, the future plans, the assets, the long-term projects. All of that belonged to us as a couple, There was no room for her in that picture. She was just a passing fancy, a temporary pleasure for Mark. Mark sat in dead silence, neither confirming nor denying anything. He looked like he was sitting on pins and needles, wishing this psychological torture would end as soon as possible. But I wasn't going to let him off that easily. I wanted to burn this horrible night into both of their memories so they would feel a shiver every time they remembered it. I turned to Ashley and, with a smile, asked her a seemingly innocent but loaded question. "Ashley, being so young and pretty, you must have a lot of men after you. I, on the other hand, am getting older. I have to hold on tight to this man so he doesn't get away. I'm afraid someone might steal him if I'm not careful. They say there are a lot of cunning little foxes out there these days, popping up like mushrooms after the rain, right?" Ashley flinched and lowered her head abruptly. She clenched her fists so tightly the tips of her fingers turned white. She knew exactly who I was referring to. The word foxes, though spoken lightly, was sharp as a blade and severed the last shred of her pride. The word hung in the air, making the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. Ashley didn't dare answer my question. She mumbled something unintelligible and avoided my inquisitive gaze. I could see her fragile shoulders trembling violently, despite her efforts to control herself. The confidence and flirtatiousness with which she had arrived at my home had completely vanished, leaving only the image of a sinner awaiting judgment. But I wasn't going to let them off the hook so easily. I turned to Mark and squeezed his arm a little tighter. My nails dug slightly into his skin through his shirt, reminding him of my powerful presence. I looked at my husband and, changing my voice to a syrupy tone but keeping my gaze sharp as a knife, asked him about the farmhouse in the Hudson Valley we had seen last week. I spoke loudly and clearly, making sure Ashley heard everything. I reminded him that our parents had loved the land, that it had good feng shui, and that being near the river, it was very cool. I emphasized that my parents had promised to contribute $150,000 for the renovation as a gift for their future grandchildren. At the mention of children, I felt Mark's body tense up. It was his weakest point. We had been married for 6 years but had postponed having children until we achieved financial stability. And now, when everything was ready, I discovered this betrayal. But I brought up the topic of children on purpose. I knew it was the strongest anchor, the family and social legitimacy that a fleeting lover like Ashley could never give him. I enthusiastically described a happy family, full of children's laughter. I said that next year was perfect to try for a child, that given our age it was the ideal time, and that I hoped it would be a boy. Then I turned to Ashley and asked if she didn't think it was a wonderful plan. At the direct question, Ashley started, and the spoon she was holding fell from her hands. The clinking of metal against the porcelain plate sounded sharp in the silence. She hurried to pick it up and, with a flushed face, stammered, That's a wonderful plan. I'm sure you'll be very happy." How ironic that forced blessing sounded from the lips of a rival. I knew that inside she was screaming, consumed by envy. She had come here hoping to carve out a place in our life. But all she found was a firm declaration of a future where there was no place for her. The large estate, the solid family ties, the long-term plans, all of it formed an impregnable wall protecting this marriage. A wall that someone like her, with nothing to offer, could never tear down. I continued my psychological attack on the financial front. I said to Mark, "Tomorrow I'll make the wire transfer for the down payment on the house, so sign the papers for the title change quickly." I deliberately emphasized that the house would be in both our names. It was a declaration of sovereignty over our assets, a warning that everything Mark had was tied to me, and that if he left me, he would lose everything. Mark, sweating profusely, nodded his head. He wished I would shut up, that I would stop torturing him with these sweet words about the future, which sounded more terrifying than a threat at knife point. He knew perfectly well the warning hidden behind each of my words. Don't be a fool and trade everything you have for a fleeting pleasure. The conversation about the house and children seemed to suck the last drop of vitality out of Ashley. She shrank into the armchair, clutching the water cup with both hands, as if seeking a warmth that had long since vanished. I glanced back and forth between the flimsy plastic cup in her hands and the gold-rimmed cup in mine, feeling a cruel pleasure. I lifted my cup, took a sip, and savored the subtle aroma of the high-quality green tea. I commented on how delicious the tea was, its clear, smooth flavor. I offered for Ashley to drink as well, but my gaze lingered on her cheap plastic cup with false compassion. "Ashley, are you okay with just water? Would you like me to make you some orange juice? Water is a bit plain, don't you think?" My voice was kind, like that of a charitable lady giving alms to a beggar, but with an undercurrent of contempt. Ashley hastily shook her hands. No, I'm fine. I was thirsty. Water is enough. I don't want to be a bother." The word bother she used struck me as ridiculous. Her mere presence here at this hour was the biggest bother of all. I set my cup down on the table. The sharp, firm sound of porcelain against glass echoed in the living room. I looked at Mark. He was still sitting like a dead man, his eyes fixed on the tips of his shoes. I decided to involve him more in this amusing game. I told him to peel some apples for our guest. A man of the house should be a gentleman. How can you have a guest sitting here unattended? Mark, as if he'd received an electric shock, jumped up and went to the kitchen for apples and a knife. He peeled the fruit clumsily, his hands trembling, leaving the skin uneven and in chunks. The man who once made me flowers out of carrots was now unable to peel a simple apple in front of his lover. His mind was short-circuited. Fear had paralyzed all his senses and skills. When he placed the plate of apples on the table, I speared the most appetizing piece with a fork and brought it directly to Mark's mouth. "Open up. I'll feed you. Don't touch it with your hands. They're dirty." Mark hesitated for a moment but finally accepted the apple I offered. The scene of a couple affectionately feeding each other in front of a third party was both natural and extremely provocative. I pushed the plate of apples toward Ashley. "You have some too, Ashley. They're imported, very crisp and sweet." Ashley looked at the piece of apple Mark had just eaten, and then at the plate in front of her, as if a lump had formed in her throat. How could she possibly swallow a bite while witnessing such a display of affection? The discriminatory treatment wasn't limited to the cups, but also to attention and care. I was the wife. I had the right to publicly care for my husband and be cared for by him. She, on the other hand, no matter how much Mark might want her on the street, was an intruder in here, a forced spectator to our marriage's happiness show. I saw Ashley's eyes redden. She was probably crying inside or perhaps regretting the stupidity of coming here to be humiliated this way. But I didn't feel a shred of compassion. My compassion died the moment I saw the "I miss you" message on the phone screen. Mercy is a luxury I do not grant to those who try to destroy another's home. Silence once again took over the living room, but this time the air smelled much more of gunpowder. Ashley, perhaps to break the tension or to try to salvage some of her image as a considerate person in front of Mark, cleared her throat and timidly asked about his health. "Boss, how's your stomach? Does it hurt less?" Her voice was low but tinged with sincere concern. She even offered to have her mother send him a preparation of honey with black garlic from her hometown, which she claimed was very good for the stomach. Hearing that, Mark's face turned livid. He hastily shook his hands, saying he was fine, that it wasn't necessary. He glanced sideways at me, terrified, knowing his stupid lover had just made a fatal mistake. She was demonstrating a knowledge of her boss's private life that far exceeded the bounds of a normal professional relationship. I let out a laugh, a short, icy laugh that made them both shudder. I looked at Ashley with a piercing gaze, as if I could read her soul. "Wow, Ashley, you really do care about your boss." Imagine that. The wife who lives and sleeps with him in the same bed hasn't even prepared him that honey with black garlic yet. But you, an intern who's only been here a few months, how do you know so much about his ailments? I deliberately drew out the words "lives and sleeps with him in the same bed" to remind Ashley of her place. I gave her no quarter and continued my attack. "Does Mark complain about his pains at the office in front of you, or do you two see each other alone so often that you even know the details of his diet?" Ashley was speechless. Her face went from red to purple. She stammered that she had simply seen him at the office touching his stomach with a pained expression and had asked out of pure assumption, a pathetic excuse. I knew that Mark's stomach problems were chronic. To avoid damaging his image as a strong leader, he rarely showed signs of weakness in public. He only did so when he was alone with someone he trusted. I shot Mark a withering look. "And you, Why are you worrying your employees at work? Next time, if you feel unwell, you tell me, your wife. Don't make other people worry and bring you medicine. They'll think your wife doesn't take care of you. The other day you told me you were late because of a client dinner and that your stomach hurt. I see now what kind of client dinner it was. At my insinuation, Mark lowered his head and said nothing. He knew exactly what I was referring to. The night he used the work dinner excuse, he had actually had dinner with Ashley and had probably complained about his pains to win the young woman's sympathy. I had just exposed the hypocrisy of a coworker's concern and laid bare the raw truth of their ambiguous relationship. Her excessive interest was proof that she had crossed the line, and I, as the wife, had every right to question and unmask that hypocrisy here in my own home. The wall clock struck 9. The cat-and-mouse game had reached its climax. I felt it was time to deliver the final blow, a blow that would completely destroy the intruder's morale and serve as a final warning to my traitorous husband. I slowly took my phone out of my pocket and placed it on the table. I swiped my finger across the screen, pretending to check a message, and then sighed deliberately. The world is so complicated these days. The news is full of nothing but infidelity and scandals. My friends tell me that young girls these days are very shameless. They send messages to other women's husbands as if they were their boyfriends, without the slightest shame. I paused and watched their reactions. Ashley remained motionless, but her breathing had quickened. Mark was discreetly wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. The tension was like a guitar string about to snap. I sharpened my voice even more and continued. I also tend to look at Mark's phone to help him with work things, and lately, I've seen a lot of messages coming in from unknown numbers. A young girl, it seems, her name sounds very innocent, must be an intern. She sends very affectionate messages to Mark. I glanced sideways at Ashley. Her face had lost all color. Her lips, once painted a deep red, were now white and trembling. With a mocking smile, I delivered the final blow. You know what, Ashley? The other day I was at home, and my husband was making dinner, and suddenly a girl sends a message to his phone saying, "I miss you." Some nerve, don't you think? With the wife at home, to dare send a message like that. Was she trying to challenge me? My words fell like a lightning bolt on Ashley. She stared at me with wide eyes, terror etched in her pupils. She understood everything. The "I miss you" message from a little while ago. The reply, "Come over, my wife isn't home tonight." It had all been a trap. A perfect trap that I myself had set, and she, like a stupid moth, had flown right into it. Ashley's hands and feet began to tremble uncontrollably. She looked at me as if she were seeing a monster. She realized that the woman sitting across from her was not a docile, naive housewife, but a master of psychological warfare. I had known everything from the beginning but had acted completely naturally, inviting her in, serving her water, offering her cake, and then I had stripped away her mask, layer by layer, until she was left completely naked in her own shame. Mark, beside me, was also in shock. He turned to me with a look of pure horror. He would never have imagined that I had read that message, and that I was twisted enough to lure Ashley here and humiliate her in this way. My intelligence and my cruelty sent a chill down his spine. He realized he had vastly underestimated his wife. I looked Ashley directly in the eyes. My gaze was cold and contemptuous. I didn't need to say anything more. My silence was the most severe of sentences. I had revealed everything, but I still hadn't spoken her name directly. I wanted to see if she had a shred of dignity left to retreat on her own. It was the last act of mercy I would grant her before she left this house. Ashley couldn't take it anymore. The invisible pressure emanating from me, Mark's cowardice, and the cruel truth that had just been revealed crushed her will. Every second must have been torture for her, as if she were sitting in an electric chair. She hastily grabbed the purse she had left beside her. In her haste, the purse hit the chair with a dull thud. She jumped up, but her legs gave way, and she almost fell. Without daring to look me in the face, with her head bowed, she mumbled that she had to leave. She made the excuse that something urgent had come up at home, that her mother had told her to come back right away, and that she was sorry she couldn't stay longer. Her voice was broken, on the verge of tears. Without waiting for our reply, she ran toward the door like a pursued thief. The cake box was left abandoned on the table, a testament to the miserable failure of her visit. Mark made a move to get up, probably to see her out or apologize, but I was faster. I put my hand on his thigh and squeezed hard, signaling him to stay put. My eyes narrowed, warning him not to do anything stupid in this situation. Mark understood my message and froze, his eyes following Ashley's back as she disappeared through the door. I stood up and followed her slowly to the entrance. I walked with calm and confidence, in stark contrast to her nervousness. Ashley was trying to put on her shoes, but her hands were trembling so much she couldn't manage it. I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of pity and contempt. When she finally managed to get her shoes on and was about to open the door to the hallway, I called her name. "Ashley." She stopped short, startled. She turned around with a frightened, pleading look. She probably feared I would make a scene in the building's hallway, that I would insult her or grab her by the hair. But I didn't. My dignity wouldn't allow me to behave like a fishwife. I approached her and whispered in her ear, low enough for only the two of us to hear. My voice was as soft as a breeze but as cold as ancient ice. "Next time you come to see my husband, call first. If you're wandering around at this time of night, the neighbors might get the wrong idea and think something strange is happening in this respectable home. And remember this, Mark's wife isn't always out of the house." Hearing my words, Ashley's face drained of all blood. She nodded repeatedly, like a pecking hen. She stammered a yes and ran toward the elevator, frantically pressing the button as if to escape as quickly as possible. Her small, lonely, pathetic figure was silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway. I watched her until the elevator doors closed, swallowing her whole. A faint smile touched my lips. One down. The young prey had been thoroughly spooked. Now, she wouldn't dare come near my husband even if you paid her. But the war wasn't over. The main enemy, the one who had caused me the deepest wound, was still sitting in the living room. I turned around and slammed the door shut. The sharp click of the lock echoed in the apartment. It announced the beginning of the judgment for the treacherous husband. I took a deep breath, regained my cold expression, and walked inside. The wooden door closed, completely isolating this apartment, thick with a deadly air, from the outside world. The smile of victory that had been on my lips was extinguished like a candle in the wind. I didn't go straight back to the living room. I stood for a few seconds, gripping the cold doorknob. The waves of nausea rising from my stomach were unbearable. I had put on a brilliant performance, but the price was a deep wound bleeding in my heart. I turned and slowly entered the living room. Mark was still in the same spot, motionless on the cream-colored leather sofa. His head was bowed, his hands clasped over his knees. He looked pathetic, a far cry from the sophisticated, self-assured husband he used to be. But his misery inspired not the slightest compassion in me. On the contrary, it only deepened my contempt. I walked over to him, picked up his smartphone, which lay abandoned on the coffee table, looked at him, then at the phone, and suddenly, with a swift movement, I smashed it hard against the glass tabletop. Crack! The sharp, violent sound broke the suffocating silence. The phone's screen shattered, cracks spreading like a spider's web, a perfect reflection of our marriage at that moment. Mark flinched, looking at me with a face pale with terror. I crossed my arms and looked down at him with an icy glare. In a sharp, firm voice, devoid of all emotion, I said, "Explain yourself." The text, "Come over." "My wife isn't home tonight, I sent that. Did you think I was an idiot who didn't know what was going on?" And just like that, Mark's jaw dropped. He looked at me in disbelief. He hadn't expected me to show my hand so quickly and so forcefully. Perhaps he thought I only had vague suspicions, but he never imagined that I was in control of everything from the start. His lips trembled as he tried to articulate a pathetic excuse. "Honey, it's a misunderstanding. She and I are just coworkers. Her coming here tonight was a total surprise to me. I swear. I didn't know anything." He tried to play the victim, his eyes avoiding mine. I let out a bitter laugh. "Coworkers. A coworker texts you at 8 p.m. saying she misses you. A coworker knows your eating habits and your ailments better than your own wife. A coworker dares to come to your house thinking your wife isn't home." I moved closer to him, looking him straight in the face, and said, enunciating every syllable, Don't take me for a fool. We've lived together for 6 years. I know you better than you know yourself. That furtive glance, that jump when the doorbell rang, that cowardly attitude in front of your lover, it all gave you away." Mark lowered his head, not daring to reply. He knew that in the face of such obvious truth, any lie was useless. His silence was the clearest of confessions. I felt an immense disappointment. The man I had loved and trusted blindly was nothing more than a dirty liar, a coward incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. Mark's silence added more fuel to the fire of my anger. I didn't need his empty apologies. I wanted him to face the harsh truth he had tried so hard to hide. I went to my purse, which was on a cabinet, and pulled out a stack of papers I had prepared that afternoon. It was the evidence I had been secretly gathering over the past week, ever since my suspicions began. I threw the papers in his face. The white sheets flew and scattered over the shattered phone. Mark picked one up, his hands trembling violently. It was a bank statement, detailing the last 3 months. I had circled in red the Venmo transfers to Ashley Collins, with ambiguous descriptions like gift or dinner. The amounts weren't huge, a few $100s each time, but the frequency was suspiciously high. One transfer of $1,500 from last week stood out, with the note "Happy Birthday." I pointed at the statement and raised my voice. "And how do you explain this money? A $1,500 birthday gift for an intern. For my birthday, a bouquet of flowers and a simple dinner were enough. Your generosity is truly admirable." Mark was speechless, sweating profusely. He hadn't expected me to know his finances in such detail, but that wasn't all. I pulled out the screenshots of his iMessage conversations that I had taken from his tablet, where he had forgotten to log out. Flirtatious messages, plans for lunch and movies, and even expressions of cloying, disgusting longing. I threw down another picture. It was a movie ticket stub from 2 weeks ago, for an 11 p.m. show. That day, he told me he was late because of a client dinner, but he was actually watching a movie with his lover. And finally, I produced a photo of a long, color-treated brown hair found on the passenger seat of his car. My hair was black and short. That hair was, without a doubt, Ashley's. Faced with such irrefutable evidence, Mark completely broke down. There was no way to deny or excuse it anymore. His mask of hypocritical morality had been torn off, revealing his true nature as a traitor. He let his arms fall to his sides and sank into the sofa with a look of desperation. And then he began to cry. A man's tears, something I had rarely seen. "I'm sorry. I just lost my head for a moment. She bewitched me. Please, forgive me, just this once." A tardy apology and a cowardly excuse, blaming someone else. Cheating men always use the same script. I gave in to temptation. I couldn't help it. Seeing him cry froze my heart. I went to the kitchen. I picked up the pot with the braised short ribs he had so carefully prepared all afternoon. Before Mark's stunned eyes, I dumped the entire contents into the corner trash can. The delicious aroma of the stew mixed with the sour smell of garbage, creating a nauseating stench. I turned to Mark and delivered my final line. "My love for you is like this stew. It was once delicious and precious, but once it's contaminated, it's nothing but garbage. And I don't eat garbage." My act of throwing away the stew was like a splash of cold water on Mark, who seemed to wake from his delusion. He realized I wasn't joking. The determination in my eyes and actions signaled an irrevocable break. Mark ran to me, knelt, and hugged my legs. He cried inconsolably, begging me not to leave him, not to divorce him. He swore he would end things with Ashley, that he would even quit his job if necessary, that he would do anything to fix his mistake. He appealed to our parents, to our 6 years of marriage, trying to hold me back. I stood rigid as a stone, letting him cry while clinging to my legs. My heart was already dead. His vows now only filled me with more disgust. If he had truly valued our 6 years of love, he wouldn't have slept with another woman. If he had truly thought of our parents, he wouldn't have let things get to this point. Coldly, I pushed his hands away and stepped back. I looked at him with pity and said, "Keep what little dignity you have left. Don't be any more pathetic. My decision is final." I turned and went straight to the bedroom. Hidden in the closet was the large suitcase I had packed that afternoon. I pulled it out and added a few more clothes and my essential personal items. I didn't take much, only what was truly mine. This house, this furniture, now seemed stained by betrayal. I came out to the living room with the suitcase. Mark was still on the floor, sobbing with his head down. His wails echoed in the silent space. I placed a sheet of paper I had printed earlier on the table. It was the loan agreement for the $40,000 our parents lent us at the beginning of our marriage, when we couldn't afford the apartment renovation, along with the receipts in my father's name. This $40,000 is a clear debt. Don't even think about not paying it. When you sell the apartment, the first thing is to settle this debt, and then we'll split the rest. I told Mark in a frigid voice. Get ready to pay back every last cent. The apartment is in both our names, but I'm not going to fight for it. I'll let you have it to live with your lover, but you have to give me back my parents' money. Mark looked at the papers and then at me. His expression was one of pure desperation. He knew he couldn't come up with that much money overnight, but I didn't care. It was the price he had to pay for his betrayal. I wanted him to feel the pain of loss to his core, both emotionally and financially. I dragged the suitcase to the door. Before leaving, I took one last look at the apartment. What was once our home had now become the tomb of my love. I opened the door and stepped out into the windy hallway. The sound of the door closing behind me echoed one last time, ending 6 years of my youth with that shameless man. Without looking back, I walked with a steady pace toward the elevator. A new life awaited me. It would be difficult, but at least it would be clean and peaceful. The taxi sped through the empty streets of the nocturnal city. Sitting in the back seat, I watched the streetlights flash by. My mind was blank, yet strangely light. I didn't cry. The tears seemed to have dried up inside, crystallized into a sharp determination. I was heading to Olivia's apartment, my best friend since college. Olivia was a top lawyer in the city, specializing in divorce and asset disputes. She was strong, decisive, and extremely intelligent. I had given her a heads up, so she was already waiting for me at the entrance when I arrived. Seeing me get out of the car with a haggard face, dragging a suitcase, Olivia didn't ask any questions. She approached silently and gave me a tight hug. At that warm gesture of friendship, I almost broke down, but I held back. It wasn't the time to show weakness. Olivia took me to her apartment. It was a small but cozy place, filled with the pleasant scent of lemongrass essential oil. She offered me a glass of warm water and told me to sit down and tell her everything, and so I did. I told her everything, from the fateful message to the theater I orchestrated to invite Ashley over, the confrontation with Mark, and my decision to leave. I spoke with a surprising calmness, as if telling someone else's story. When I finished, Olivia slammed her hand on the table with a thud. She cursed and told me I had done the right thing, that a cheating man is unforgivable, and that my handling of the mistress had been next-level civilized, yet extremely cruel. Olivia began to analyze the situation from a legal perspective. She reviewed the evidence I had gathered, the bank statements, the texts, the photos. She nodded and said that I had more than enough to win in court. She offered to take my case if Mark didn't agree to an amicable divorce. But Olivia told me that before going to court, we should teach that perfect couple a lesson they would never forget. The divorce was my liberation, but true justice was punishing the traitor. She proposed a more subtle plan of revenge. Instead of creating a scandal or exposing him on social media and becoming city gossip, we would attack what mattered most to Mark, his career and his reputation. Olivia instructed me to organize all the evidence into a single file. She told me she would help me draft a formal complaint to send to Mark's company's leadership, a mortal blow to his finances and credibility. It would be 1,000 times more painful than a few slaps. I agreed. Our eyes met, and they shone with determination. That night would be the night we planned the final battle. The 2 days of the weekend passed in an eerie silence. Mark called and texted incessantly, but I didn't answer. I turned off my phone and spent all my time at Olivia's, preparing the special gift for my husband and his lover. Olivia helped me draft the email. Instead of insults or slander, we used professional, objective, and sharp language, as if it were an indictment. The subject line was short but powerful. Report on violation of internal code of conduct and inappropriate relationship between team lead and intern. I scanned all the evidence. The iMessage screenshots with the explicit conversations, the bank statements proving the use of his salary for gifts, the improper use of company funds, the photo of the movie tickets during work hours as proof of professional negligence. Olivia organized everything into a single PDF file over 10 megabytes, clearly annotating dates, times, and places. On Monday morning, the sky was gray, foreshadowing a storm. At 9 a.m. sharp, the time when all office workers sit at their desks and start checking their email, I turned on the computer. Olivia, sitting next to me, placed a hand on my shoulder in support. I took a deep breath and reviewed the draft one last time. The recipient list included the CEO, the head of human resources, and the heads of the involved departments. I didn't send it company-wide. I didn't want to become a cheap gossip monger. I only sent it to the people with the power to decide Mark and Ashley's fate. The mouse cursor hovered over the send button. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the tension of the decisive moment. A single click would completely change the lives of 3 people. Mark would lose the career he had built over 10 years. Ashley would lose the future that was just beginning to blossom, and I would put an end to a painful past to start a new chapter. I remembered Ashley's brazen look when she arrived at my house. I remembered Mark's cowardice, kneeling and begging for forgiveness. I remembered the stew dumped in the trash. The last bit of compassion left in my heart vanished. "Goodbye, ex-husband," I whispered to myself as I firmly pressed the left mouse button. Sent. A short, cold notification appeared on the computer screen. The email, loaded with the death sentence for Mark and Ashley's careers, had been sent. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long sigh of relief. It was over. The arrow had been shot, and no one could stop it. Now I just had to wait for the storm to break over the traitors' heads. That Monday, the atmosphere at Mark's company must have been as suffocating as the night Ashley came to our house. According to an acquaintance who worked in the same department, my email caused a huge shockwave and spread like wildfire in minutes. Mark tried to act normal when he arrived at work, but inside he must have been consumed by panic. At 10 a.m., the head of HR called him into a conference room. There, they presented him with evidence that he had used the corporate card for personal expenses with Ashley and had falsified business meal receipts. It was clear-cut embezzlement, and he was suspended without pay pending a full audit. Mark stood up, his face ashen. He opened his mouth to try to make an excuse, to say it was a misunderstanding, slander, but the HR director raised a hand firmly, cutting him off. On the table lay a thick binder containing the printout of the very PDF file I had sent. Faced with such irrefutable evidence, Mark was speechless. 2 security guards approached and asked him to collect his personal belongings and leave the office immediately. Everyone was stunned to see the man who had been a respected team lead escorted out of the company like a criminal. Mark walked in silence, his head bowed, amidst the whispers of the people watching him. That public humiliation would permanently stain his career. From Olivia's apartment, I received the news by phone without feeling any emotion. I didn't laugh with satisfaction or feel pity. It was the price of betrayal. When he trampled on our marriage and pursued his desires, he himself had signed his career's death warrant. 3 days later, his termination was made official. The reason stated in an internal memo was gross violation of professional ethics and damage to the company's image and trust. Mark not only lost his job, but was also blacklisted by HR professionals in the industry. In this city, rumors travel faster than the wind. Once your moral reputation is tarnished, especially by a scandal with a subordinate, the doors of your career slam shut. The financial consequences soon followed, like a tidal wave. Mark lost his main source of income, but the bank loans were still due on time. The car payment, the mortgage, the credit cards, it all became a noose tightening around his neck. Before, thanks to his high salary and my good management, he lived comfortably without checking prices. Now, just the monthly interest payments made him break out in a cold sweat. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was Mark's number. Seeing the name husband flash on the screen, I let out a dry laugh and changed his contact name to Mark Miller. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then the texts started. At first, they were pleas, begging for forgiveness, asking me to withdraw the complaint, to give him a chance to start over. When I didn't respond, the tone shifted to accusations, calling me cruel and heartless for ruining his life. I skimmed them and deleted them all. Cruel? When he was in bed with another woman while I waited at home with dinner ready, did he ever think of the word cruelty? When he used our joint money to buy his lover expensive gifts, did he ever think of my effort? I had only claimed what was fair for me. Even his parents, who lived back home, called me. His mother, crying, insulted me, calling me a terrible wife who had destroyed her husband and her family. She said it was normal for a man to have an affair, that a woman should endure it to keep peace in the home. Hearing that, I felt a bitter resignation for the fate of women. I calmly told my mother-in-law that I couldn't live with a traitor, and hung up. I blocked the numbers of his entire family as well. I didn't want to hear any more hypocritical moral lectures. Mark had lost everything. Literally everything. Wife, family, career, reputation. And now he was drowning in debt. He would wander through that large but empty apartment, facing the four walls and overwhelming loneliness. It was the most fitting punishment for someone who hadn't valued what he had. Ashley's fate was not much different. As soon as Mark was suspended, she was also called into HR. She entered the room with swollen eyes and a haggard look, a far cry from the confident, flirtatious image of that night. The decision to terminate her internship was immediate. The reason? Violation of internal conduct rules and damaging the work environment. Ashley cried, begged for a second chance, said she was young and had given in to temptation, but in the ruthless corporate world, such naive excuses are worthless. It was a major firm. Being dismissed in disgrace meant the doors to her future had been slammed shut halfway. Worse than losing the job was the contempt of her colleagues. The story of the brazen mistress who challenged the lawful wife became the hottest topic in the company's anonymous chat groups. When Ashley packed her things in a cardboard box, no one approached to talk to her or help. Everyone looked at her with disdain, whispering behind her back. The men who used to hit on her now avoided her like the plague, afraid of being tainted by the scandal. Ashley left the office alone, carrying her box. The long, empty hallway seemed like the thorny path that awaited her. In front of the elevator, she ran into the same security guard who had witnessed her flight days before. The man's compassionate look was the last straw, and Ashley finally broke down, sobbing loudly. She ran out of the building, leaving the jeers of the people behind. According to Olivia, after that incident, Ashley couldn't bear the stares and moved out of her apartment. She set all her social media accounts to private and vanished from the virtual world. It was a very expensive lesson for a young woman just starting her life. She tried to trade her beauty and youth for something vain, but in the end, she lost the most valuable things for a woman, her honor and her self-esteem. I didn't feel sorry for Ashley. She chose that path, ignoring morals and ethics, and the consequences were hers to bear. I only hope that after this painful failure, she learns to live a more upright life. 2 months later, we met again in court for the divorce mediation. Mark looked like he had aged 10 years. His beard was unkempt, and his clothes were wrinkled. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but I remained cold and distant. Olivia accompanied me as my lawyer. Her professional, sharp presence further intimidated Mark. In court, Mark tried to cling to the idea that he still loved me and wanted to salvage our relationship, but Olivia presented the irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, dashing his faint hope in one fell swoop. The division of assets was the point of greatest tension. The luxury apartment was our largest asset. Mark, out of pride, wanted to keep it. He didn't want to be on the street. He proposed paying me my share in monthly installments. I let out a contemptuous laugh and shook my head firmly. I would not allow any financial tie to bind me to my ex-husband. Olivia, on my behalf, presented my conditions. Either he paid me 50% of the house's value in a single payment, plus the $40,000 for the renovation my parents contributed, or we would sell the house and split the money. He, of course, would be responsible for the entire outstanding mortgage. Mark's face, unemployed and in debt, turned white. Where was he going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight? The bank had already started sending him foreclosure notices for missing 3 months of mortgage payments. In the end, he had no choice but to agree to sell the house. The apartment, once his pride and joy, was listed as a distress sale below market price for a quick sale. After paying off the mortgage, giving me my share and my parents $40,000, Mark was left with almost nothing. He signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand. His shaky signature put an end to 6 years of marriage. He walked out of the courthouse empty-handed, both literally and figuratively. No house, no car, he had already sold it to pay debts, no wife, and no job. He stood alone in the sunny courthouse courtyard, silently watching me leave in a taxi. The price was very high, but it was entirely his fault. I received the money from the sale of the house and the division of assets. It was a considerable sum, enough to start a new life. Instead of a large apartment like before, I chose a smaller, cozier place in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. I decorated my new home to my own taste. No more ostentatious, flashy furniture to satisfy Mark's vanity. Instead, I used soft beige tones, fresh plants, and a simple, solid wood bookshelf. Every corner of the house reflected my personality and gave me an unusual sense of peace. Tonight, I invited Olivia over for a housewarming. We're sitting on the balcony with a cool breeze, drinking red wine and looking at the illuminated city. Olivia toasted to my freedom, for having escaped that disaster. I smiled and clinked my glass against my valuable friends. Without her strength and determination, I probably wouldn't have weathered this storm with such fortitude. My phone buzzed with a notification. My paycheck had been deposited. I was promoted to team lead after successfully leading a major project. The intense work has helped me gradually move away from the pain of the past. I opened Facebook and saw a message from a stranger. Her profile picture was a sunflower in full bloom. She was thanking me. It turns out Olivia had anonymously shared my story on a women's forum to alert others, changing all names and personal details. The woman told me that reading my story had given her the courage to leave her husband, who had been abusing and cheating on her for years. Reading the message, I felt a strange warmth in my heart. My pain had not been entirely useless. It had become a motivation and a lesson for other women navigating a sea of suffering. I took a deep breath, enjoying the cool autumn night air. The past was locked behind the courthouse doors. Now, a wide sky full of hope stretches before me. I am Chloe. I am 32 years old. I am single, independent, and happy. I smiled and took a sip of wine. The bitter taste of the wine and the sweet aftertaste it leaves in your throat are like my life. I suppose you have to go through the bitterness to be able to taste the sweetness of freedom. Thank you for listening to my story to the end.